Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pitts. Ukraine War News Update, second part thereof for the 11th of October 2024. This is a military aid and geopolitics video. Shortly before I do a live stream with Sean Pinner, and I'm a little bit behind, so I better get through this in a concise fashion, which is almost impossible for me. Right, just going to start with the Czech initiative. Prime Minister Petr Fiala has said the Czech initiative to supply artillery shells to Ukraine will be able to achieve its goals and provide Ukraine with 500,000 shells by the end of this year. Now, I don't know quite what that means. I'd like to know, as again, I'd quite like to know the source for that, because there's a lack of clarity as to whether that is talking about an extra 500,000 from what they've already given, or whether by the end of the year they will have given 500,000. But of course, originally they promised 800,000 and 1 million, and it depends whether they're taking into account the Estonian initiative, or Estonia came up and said that I think it was Estonia, that actually they had located a bunch of other shells as well that could also be procured. So I don't know. Anyway, I guess the top line here is that the Czech initiative is succeeding. It's providing artillery ammunition to Ukraine, and it will continue to do so until at least the end of the year. Okay, now the World Bank has approved a new Ukraine fund, according to Reuters. They say the World Bank's executive board on Thursday approved the creation of a financial intermediary fund, FIF, to support Ukraine, with contributions expected from the US, Canada and Japan. Three sources familiar with the decision said. The only objection to the vote came from Russia. Two of the sources familiar with the vote said. Okay. A fund to be administered by the World Bank will help fulfill a pledge by the Group of 7 rich democracies to provide Ukraine with up to $50 billion in additional funding by the end of the year as it continues to battle Ukraine's invasion over 2 years ago, the sources said. Now, I am a little bit confused because, right, I'm sure it's going to go on to talk about this by the looks of it. You have the G7 pledging all this money underwritten by frozen Russian assets, and you have the EU fulfilling a G7 pledge by providing $50 billion themselves. But is that different? Anyway, the article continues, exact amounts to be contributed by the US, Japan and Canada are still being worked out, but will be backed by interest from frozen Russian sovereign assets, one of the sources says. So the idea is that you loan the money to Ukraine. Ukraine don't pay it back. It is paid back by the profits from frozen Russian assets. So you're not actually liquefying, whatever you want to say, those Russian assets. They're still going to be there in case you need them at some other point, or in case you eventually want to give them back to Russia or give them to Ukraine as a kind of reparations or something. So you're not dipping into the assets themselves, but you are creaming off the profits to them to repay the loan. So Ukraine isn't actually, you are as far as Ukraine's concerned, you're giving the money to Ukraine, but effectively it's Russian money. So this is a very sensible way of doing things. But of course, as I mentioned, there appears to be this US, Japan, Canada one, and then the EU one. So the World Bank vote came a day after the European Union envoys agreed to give Ukraine up to 35 billion euros, which is $38.3 billion. Oh, it's not as much. I was reporting. Okay, so exchange rate and all that. That's $38.3 billion as part of the bloc's share in a larger planned loan from the G7 nations. And this is the detail I don't understand. Also backed by proceeds from the frozen Russian central bank assets state from the Council of the EUZ. So is that 38.3 billion part of the 50 billion? And US, Japan and Canada will make up the 12 billion in their own frozen Russian assets profits. So the US has actually a relatively small amount of frozen Russian assets. So of all it was originally thought $300 billion worth of frozen Russian assets, most of those exist in the EU, and most of them actually in Belgium as part of the Euroclear amount. I think, was it the US had $3 or $5 billion worth of assets, and Japan has a bunch as well. Obviously Canada has some involvement here. So it could be that it is 50 billion in all, 38.3 billion coming from Europe and 17.7 billion coming from US, Canada and Japan. That seems sensible to me. Okay, or coherent to me. Josh Lipsky, senior director of the Atlantic Council's Geoeconomic Center, said that the two actions would allow G7 countries to provide a significant funding boost to Ukraine and make good on promises made at the G7 Leaders Summit in June. Quote, "This is a game-changing amount of money," he said, noting that Ukraine's spending on the war in 2023 is around $80 billion to $90 billion. Quote, "It's real resources on the ground that can make a difference." The US Treasury Department and White House declined to comment. No comment was immediately available from Japan or Canada. US President Joe Biden spoke with Olaf Scholz, German Chancellor, about Ukraine and other topics on Thursday after Biden postponed his trip to Germany in anticipation of Hurricane Milton, the White House said. World Bank President Ajay Banga told Reuters in May that he was absolutely open to the idea of managing a G7 loan fund for Ukraine backed by the earnings from frozen Russian sovereign assets, at least for non-military purposes. Okay, so it could be a case of this going towards funding Ukraine as a nation. Things like paying for pensions, education, etc., all that needs to be sorted out so the country exists. But also, I wonder whether non-military could also include funding the wages of the military as well through those means, and that's obviously going to be super important. Right, Norway has allocated over $87 million to expand weapons production for Ukraine. Small and medium-sized Norwegian defence companies are set to receive some substantial funding to develop innovative technologies for use in Ukraine. Again, this is sort of inward investment. This is a case of Norway saying, here's $87 million that we are going to pay ourselves to innovate and create weapons for Ukraine. According to, which is great, and like I've said before, it's really important that you are able to do that, because you have a vested interest both from a strategic point of view but also from an economic point of view to help Ukraine. Okay, French Aid to Ukraine says, and this is super important, I've been talking about how the original rumours were 6 Mirage 2005 Fs were going to Ukraine. Now, according to various sources, France will deliver between 12 and 20 Mirage 5 Fs to Ukraine next year. So early next year it starts. This is much better than I was expecting. This is between 2 and 3 times, maybe over 3 times the amount of Mirages that I was originally thinking were going to be provided. So France will supply 12 to 20 of these Mirage 2K jets to Ukraine by quarter 1 2025. The aircraft, originally designed for air policing, will be adapted for multi-role combat, so they'll be able to shoot at ground targets, including the ability to fire Scalp EG cruise missiles. So previously we've only had certain Sukhoi jets that could fire them. In fact, possibly even only a handful of those left, which might be why we are seeing fewer Scalp and Storm Shadows fired. Could be that actually they've got some missiles, just not enough of the airplanes to carry them safely. Anyway, Mirage will be able to fire those. Ukrainian pilots, mechanics and gunsmiths will undergo intensive training, and the jets will be repainted in Ukrainian colours before deployment. So that's really good news. This is a fantastic bit of news, to get 3 times as many planes as we had previously thought. And then you're going to add them to what is looking like at the moment something like 70, late 70s number of planes for F-16s for Ukraine, with maybe a number also given for spares and whatnot. And they hope that's going to increase. But, you're looking at 100 planes with much greater capability than they already presently have. That's fantastic news. US defense tech company Anduril will begin selling small autonomous drones after successfully testing them in Ukraine, Reuters reported on the 10th. Now, this again goes to the idea that the support for Ukraine should be seen in terms of supporting one's own industry and national security. So in this case, the US, it has had a US defense company selling these autonomous drones on the back of testing them in Ukraine, using Ukraine as a test bed, and Ukraine gets a benefit of supply of these munitions or weapons or whatever, and then they can put them on the open market. Ukraine says, thank you very much, this is the US supporting Ukraine, and then effectively supporting their own defense industry. Again, it's these kind of arguments and these kind of examples that need to be sold to the American public. I'm so fed up of listening to wingnuts tell me that why should we support, like I'm arguing all the time with these absolute numbnuts online, arguing why should we support Ukraine. It's like, it's not a free lunch. You get a lot out of this. In fact, You get everything out of this. You would not be putting a penny into Ukraine, apart from maybe some humanitarian support, and unless it was absolutely in your best interest to do so. And you can look at that economically from a national defense point of view, in terms of tooling up your own defense capabilities through funding Ukraine. Actually, it's funding yourself, and the economic stimulus you get from this, so on and so forth. It just frustrates me. You still get Americans or any nationality person who is from a nation supporting Ukraine coming up with these annoyingly crass arguments. Right, okay, going on to geopolitics. Zelensky was with the UK Prime Minister and Mark Rutte, as I mentioned yesterday, with Keir Starmer, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte. Key topics included Euro-Atlantic integration and military strengthening Ukraine to foster conditions for a just peace. They also discussed the swift implementation of decisions from the Washington NATO summit and coordinated next steps. Good. And it looks like they're going to get some more British equipment in the form of AS-90 self-propelled howitzers. And then he went to Paris. We are not considering a ceasefire in exchange for Western guarantees, Zelensky said in Paris. Russia works a lot with the media. It's understandable. So this was good. There was some rhetoric to suggest that they weren't going to be negotiating away their territories or giving a ceasefire in exchange for whatever the US or the EU might want, right? It's not that. It doesn't look like, at least that's not what France is going to be supporting. So that's really good news. Then he went to Italy, and I don't really know the outcome. I don't know too much outcome from all of these three meetings. I'm sure there's a lot that won't be made public. I don't know that this is so much about going to get some more equipment secured, although of course they would love that. This is more about sorting things out and discussions and a victory plan. So he's presenting the Ukrainian victory plan, I think, to all of these people. Indefatigable Zelensky arrives at the Vatican after his overnight stay in Rome. It's funny, I used that word twice yesterday. So yesterday he met with the PMs of Italy and UK and President of France after meeting Papa Rimsky. Germany is the next stop. So he's meeting at the moment, or he's just met the Pope. And we can see that here. Zelensky gave a picture of the Bucha massacre to the Pope during Vatican meeting. I think that's very clever. This is like, you have been a little bit both sidesist, the Pope has, and he's got into a bit of hot water with people who are very much in support of Ukraine by his pro-Russian sentiments. This is very pointed. This is, oh, by the way, I've got you a picture. It's not a replica of the Mona Lisa. It's not. I'll tell you what it is. It's a butcher massacre where Russians came in, invaded our country, and then killed loads of civilians. So thought I'll get you a picture of that, so you can hang that up and remind yourselves who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. Thank you. See you later. So the conversation between the president of Ukraine and the Pope lasted about 35 minutes. Then we've had the Serbian President Vučić signed a declaration supporting Ukraine. So prior to this whistle-stop tour around northern Western Europe, he was in, where was it? Croatia, where he was meeting the Ukraine Southeast Europe Summit. So he met those people from Greece, North Macedonia, obviously Serbia as well, Croatia, and that was really, really useful. Serbia is outside of the EU and inside the sphere of influence of Russia. So this is a very problematic nation as far as the EU and the West in general is concerned. And for them to have signed a declaration supporting Ukraine is really important. The declaration condemns Russia's actions. Wow. Calls the war a crime against Ukraine. Wow. And pledges ongoing support for Kiev. However, Serbia will not impose sanctions on Russia. Okay. But rhetorically speaking, that's super important. I wonder how much arm twisting is going on with Serbia. I wonder if there are carrots or sticks involved from the EU and from the US and from the UK maybe. So all of those three playing, and maybe even Japan and Australia, all these other nations who are playing a part in supporting Ukraine. I don't know how much Serbia is being pressured to do something like this, or whether this is coming off Serbia's own back. If it's coming off Serbia's own back, then that's a bizarre position for them to take, given the history of what they have been saying and what they've been doing. So I think this is a move in the right directions, so we can be happy with that, hopefully. Putin, at the moment, is arrived in Turkmenistan. He will have a meeting with the president of Turkmenistan, and then he will discuss the situation in the Middle East with the president of Iran, Masoud Pezeshkian. We'll see the results of this meeting by how events will develop in the Middle East. Putin's main interest is to increase the escalation further, says Anton Gerashchenko, and as soon as possible to influence the election results in the United States. Obviously, Putin wants the Middle East to go nuts at the moment so that there is all that division in the US political landscape, and that chaos plays into his hands, and he can sell Trump as the one that's going to solve the issue in the Middle East. Oh, and note Putin's right hand. There are so many theories regarding that. He doesn't move his right hand, but he long hasn't. And this is one way to kind of try and work out whether he's using a body double or not, and tracking back, because he's long. Was it a fall that he had? That was one of the theories as to why he can't move his right arm so much. Then you get things like Parkinson's and all these other theories, but certainly he's long had a bit of an issue with his right arm. Anyway, Russian missiles, continues Gerashchenko in another post, and drones continue to kill Ukrainian civilians. Iranian Shahid drones are killing Ukrainian civilians, so soon it will be 3 years of this nightmare. Russian President Putin and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian continue to meet, shake hands and agree on more killings. The UN, whose direct duty is to maintain peace, can do nothing to stop these murders. Although the Security Council has passed numerous resolutions against Iran and North Korea, real action is blocked by Russia illegally occupying the USSR's seat at the UN. Yes, absolutely. And Talaria will be super happy to hear Anton Gerashchenko talk about this. This is a bone of contention with some people, many people. It should be with everyone, because Russia are not justified in holding a position in the UN Security Council, in the UN at all. You know, they haven't gone through the proper process of acceding to the UN, right? In the same way that other nations do. They just assumed the position from the USSR. And of course, the Russian Federation is not the USSR. And so in any significant way more than Ukraine is or isn't the USSR. So why do Ukraine not have a permanent seat in the Security Council? Why do Ukraine not have that same position in the UN that Russia do? You know, Russia just assumed the USSR's role. Okay, anyway, I digress. Where, or I don't, because that's exactly what he's talking about. So where are decisive steps, he asks? Where is the use of the United Nations for Peace mechanism? Where are the sanctions to bypass the paralysed Security Council? The blame for the deaths of Ukrainian women and children from Iranian drones and Russian missiles lies not only with Iran and Russia, it lies on all those who are silent, who do not act. The global organisation has lost itself in political games, forgetting its main mission, protection of innocent lives. How much are the lives of Ukrainians worth, of Ukrainian children? When will these killings finally be stopped by the global community? So a bit of a rant there, but Putin is going off and meeting all these people from Iran, from the sort of Caucasus, Eurasia sort of area, and yeah, that's where he's at the moment. Right, Euromaidan Press warns that Russia has unleashed €150 million propaganda blitz in Moldova to derail their EU integration. So Moldova looking to join the EU, but Transnistria is this kind of exiled, this annexed, area of Moldova that the Russians have assumed control of, and then they're fomenting discord by disinformation campaigns, but also ploughing money into supporting political parties and movements in Moldova and other places in Transnistria and other places in Moldova, in order to present to the public a supposedly viable political alternative to an EU-facing Moldovan government. So ahead of the crucial referendum, Kremlin-backed oligarchs are injecting this huge sum into a massive disinformation offensive. The goal, total control to foster a corrupt system aligned with Russia's interests. €150 million represents 1% of Moldova's GDP, so this is huge. Unprecedented scale of foreign interference. Victory Bloc, created by Fugitive Shore in Moscow, exemplifies this approach. €5 million spent on a single-day Congress. Propaganda floods social media, despite TV bans, TikTok emerges as a key battleground. So there's this party created by, is it Igor Shaw? That has, I think, been banned in Moldova, but they are using money to disinform the general public. October, crucial presidential election, same as it in Georgia, and the EU referendum in Moldova. Russia is less worried about pro-Western Sandu's re-election and focuses on swaying the referendum. So, okay, she might get re-elected back in, but we can sway that referendum to vote, just like Brexit, against EU integration. Then job done. And a future parliamentary vote. Country's European future hangs in the balance, says Eurominded Press, and the same can be said, as I say, about Georgia. Now, hundreds of apparent pro-Russian bot accounts on Twitter, on X, are pushing the US election, pushing US election misinformation, I'd say disinformation, and amplifying false narratives about Democratic contender Kamala Harris, a research group said on Thursday. Now, there is an awful lot of hurricane disinformation going around, which is super, super worrying because it's dangerous, but it's also, again, fed by Russian interference. So, as this AFP, Agence France Presse article says, hundreds of pro-Russian bot accounts on Twitter are pushing US election misinformation. A report calls them sleeper agents for having evaded detection for years. The findings of the Washington-based American Sunlight Project, ASP, demonstrate how bot-like activity plagues Twitter, or X, despite pledges by billionaire owner Elon Musk to crack down on digital manipulation. ASP analysed nearly 1,200 accounts, a long-standing network that generated more than 100 million posts as of July, including pro-Kremlin propaganda content favouring Republican nominee Donald Trump and misinformation about Harris's campaign. The accounts, some of which have escaped detection and moderation on the site for as long as 15 years, retweeted such content within seconds of its posting, indicating bot activity, the group said in a report shared with AFP ahead of its public release. And what really pisses me off is Elon Musk doesn't do anything about this, even though he said that was one of his goals. And in fact, one of the reasons he gave for almost not buying it was the number of bot accounts under Jack Dorsey and then the next guy in charge of Twitter, and then promptly took over and then realized that these bots accounts are working to his political agenda, and so he does nothing about them. Quote, we are not surprised to find another pro-Russian bot network, but we were shocked to learn that some of the accounts in the sleeper network have been active for more than a decade, said the group's founder, Yankovic. The former head of the former Department of Homeland Security Disinformation chief, called on Twitter to take down the network, which has seen an uptick in, quote, abusive and false content targeting Harris. One account created in 2020 promoted the falsehood that Harris had admitted that she will be a puppet of Ukraine's President Zelensky if elected president. It also touted the unfounded claim that the White House was pushing the regime change in Lebanon, taking advantage of Israel's recent attacks on the militant group Hezbollah. Another account created in 2011 shared a post by Musk, who has endorsed Trump and courted criticism for amplifying political falsehoods through his influential personal account, that pushed a debunked narrative that migrants were being imported into the United States to manipulate the November the 5th election. So that's a really common one, this kind of great replacement theory, and that people are being shipped in from Venezuela in order to make, all of this outright lies. Anyway, it goes on and on. Platform manipulation, the amount of money being spent on this, just, it really, really worrying. Ahead of his purchase of the platform, Musk pledged to, quote, defeat the spam bots or die trying. Well, he's doing neither. Despite I'd like him to do either. This is behaviour that is fairly easy to identify, says this quote, and yet this multi-billion-dollar corporation has not cracked down on these accounts that violate its own platform manipulation and spam policies. It's not like you're asking Elon Musk to do something over and above what he should be doing, like to change these are the existing policies that he has in place, his own policies, and he's not fulfilling them because it's politically useful for him to allow these Russian bots. I mean, the US election is being interfered with, and Elon Musk is apparently saying, go for it. I don't give a damn. And along these kind of lines, this is a Raw Story article, a GOP Senate hopeful who said Democrats emboldened Russia is himself linked to $415 million in Russian assets. Who knew? As a hedge fund manager, Pennsylvania Republican US Senate candidate Dave McCormick's company held roughly $415 million in Russian sovereign bonds prior to Putin's invasion of Ukraine. According to a Thursday report in The Guardian, McCormick, who is running against the three-term incumbent Senator Bob Casey, who should win. Bob Casey's a really decent human being, by the way. If you know, yeah, he's just a really good candidate, and why that shouldn't be close. But anyway, was found to have held the Russian debt through his firm Bridgewater Associates through 2017 to 2021. Sovereign debt is a major source of funding for countries to pay for operations and service debt, and has increasingly become subjected to sanctions since 2019. So on and so forth. It goes on to give more and more details. Yeah, unsurprising there. And finally, breaking news, Telegram has started blocking Russian proxy channels in Moldova en masse. I probably should have had this back in the Moldova one. The channels of the fugitive oligarch Shaw, his parties, as well as the channels funded by the FSB and broadcasting Kremlin propaganda were blocked. Brilliant. And this is good, right? This isn't about freedom of speech. This is about not allowing freedom to commit crimes of disinformation. So that is a crime, and you're not free to do it. You're not free to lie to manipulate the electorate of another country into doing what a nefarious state actor wants to do. That you can wang on about bloody freedom of speech, but sod off, because do you know what? This should not be allowed to happen. It should be a free and fair election where people get to listen to the truths and data and real justifiable arguments. But it shouldn't be one where the side with the most money they can spend on lying to confuse and manipulate the other side gets to win the election. That shouldn't be how the world works. So it's right that kind of stuff gets closed down. With freedom of speech as a right becomes a responsibility. And if you're not going to exercise yourselves responsibly enough, then you are not entitled to lie to the general public. You're not entitled to get onto a plane and shout bomb. You're not entitled to get into a theatre and shout fire, fire, fire. You're not entitled as a 12-year-old kid to run up to your teacher in the middle of class, disrupt the class for half an hour, and by swearing and shouting racist invective into the teacher's face. You're not entitled to do that. We're going to actually stop you from doing that. And we're going to moderate you by saying if you do that, you're going to get detention or expelled from the school. That is what we do. We don't just sit there and go, well, you are entitled to say what you like. Freedom of speech. I'm just going to sit here and a teacher and all these kids are just going to sit here while you shout insults at me for half an hour. We're not going to do anything about it. We're just going to sit back and let you ruin this information space. Because freedom of speech. Or we say, shut up and get out. Or we say to Russian disinformation accounts on Telegram, shut up and get out. You ain't welcome here. That's enough from me. Before I start ranting, I'm now going to go and speak to Sean. Take care, everybody. Speak to you soon.